Now, in black people, they have a disease called sickle cell anemia. The same disease in white people is called thalassemia. This is where the mother is having the baby go down the assembly line, and when the bone marrow is being formed, the part that makes the hemoglobin, there's something missing, and the hemoglobin has what's called the sickle cell trait, or the thalassemia trait. You're missing nutrients. Instead of being like this normal red blood cell over here, looks like a little donut, they will sickle and look like grains of wheat, maybe even look like a sickle. And so you can see where these would clog up little arteries and cause strokes and swelling and all kinds of other complications. And so by supplementing with the 90 essential nutrients, which we'll get into in a minute, and taking some extra selenium and some extra B6, you can prevent people who have that sickle cell trait from sickling. Been doing this since 1991 in people in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Georgia Sickle Cell Foundation. You all heard of Down syndrome. Down syndrome is not genetically transmitted. Down syndrome is actually caused by a zinc deficiency in the first 10 minutes of pregnancy. I've actually reversed them, not after the baby's born, not after 91 days, but Lauren Knievel, Evel Knievel's niece-in-law, called me about 12 years ago, and she said, look, Doc, I've got a pregnancy. It's 2.5 months along. By 2 different tests for 2 different laboratories, they tell me I have a baby with Down syndrome. I don't want to have an abortion. And they tell me you might be able to help me. I said, well, we've done it in animals. We've never done it in humans. And she said, well, I'm not going to get an abortion, so, you know, this is not going to be a problem. Just let's do it. And so what I did was give her the 90 essential nutrients and give her some extra zinc, and the baby was born perfectly normal later on. Done it several times since. Okay, early on in pregnancy with a Down syndrome baby, apparently they are reversible. But once the baby's 91 days, you can't. You've all heard of spina bifida. One of the lawsuits I lodged against the FDA was over folic acid supplementation and prenatal vitamins. Until we sued them, there was no law requiring folic acid and prenatal vitamins, and babies would be born with spina bifida. This baby also has a zinc deficiency because he's got club feet. This baby has a gluten intolerance because he's born with no hair. All this is avoidable by perfect nutrition and corrective diets before conception. Whose fault is this? This kind of stuff? The OBGYN. I told you that I discovered the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis in a rhesus monkey, Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia, Emory University. And, of course, they fired me for saying it wasn't genetic. And about 5 years ago, we began to send Jerry Lewis papers and records of kids whose muscular dystrophy had been reversed. We had learned the cause, prevention, and cure of muscular dystrophy in animals in 1957, and over the years, I had used it every once in a while. I'd see a muscular dystrophy kid, and we were able to reverse it, and I'd see another one 3 or 4 years later, and we'd be able to reverse it, but it wasn't big enough numbers to make any impact on science. Well, about 5 years ago, one of our associates, Marvin Ropp, who was a Navy SEAL, but he started out as an Amish kid. When he reached 18, he shaved his beard off, gave his team of horses to his brother, joined the Navy, and became a Navy SEAL, very highly decorated. He came back, and he was just really offended because the medical doctors were using the Amish as an ATM machine, telling him all their diseases were genetic, and there's nothing to do about it, and they were just ripping these poor people off. So we gave Jerry Lewis all of the paperwork on dozens and dozens of muscular dystrophy kids that their doctors said were cured. Their doctors said the genetic markers had been reversed, and the symptoms all went away. The biopsies said they're normal. And so Jerry Lewis got excited. He said, Jerry, we don't want any money. We've already spent the time and money and effort. We now know what we believe is the cause, prevention, and cure of muscular dystrophy. Do you want to be the one? These are Jerry's kids. Do you want to be the one to make the announcements? He got excited. He took all this data to the medical committee of Muscular Dystrophy Foundation, and they fired Jerry Lewis 4 years ago. That's why he's not doing the telethon anymore. They fired Jerry Lewis. He's not sick. He's not dead. He's doing shows in Vegas every night. They fired Jerry Lewis. Somebody needs to go to jail. Well, in 1989, with Ma Lan, I went to China and went to Qishan province, China. Why did I go there? Because everybody knows the Qishan disease which occurs in 13 out of every 1,000 kids there, is a cardiomyopathy heart disease. So sudden heart death is caused by deficiency of selenium. We know a deficiency of selenium is the cause of cystic fibrosis and the cause of muscular dystrophy. And I reasoned that if this is true, and everybody, including the World Health Organization, agreed that Keyshawn disease, as cardiomyopathy heart disease, is caused by a selenium deficiency, there had to be some kids there in China with cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy. And experts, when I asked them about it, they said, no, come on, Wallach. Cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy only occur in white kids from Eastern European origin. Well, I knew that wasn't true because I had autopsied black kids and Oriental kids, Asian kids that had these diseases, cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy, so I knew that couldn't be true. So we went there. Passed all the tests, did everything we needed to do to satisfy the Chinese government that we knew what we were doing. They were going to get their credit for it. And did 1,700 autopsies in kids under the age of 10. 595 of them, exactly 35%, had cystic fibrosis and 100% had muscular dystrophy. Published it in English. Publish it, okay, in the Journal of Trace Element Research. Very well-respected scientific journal in the United States. The equivalent journals in Chinese in China. Sent copies to the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation, to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, never heard a word from them. Somebody needs to go to jail. You all have heard of cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is one of these gradient diseases. It's a gradient disease, different degrees of severity. Baby's born with 10% of his cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that's damaged when you have cerebral palsy. 10% damage, 10% underdevelopment. The baby's going to kind of walk like Charlie Chaplin, and with braces and some physical therapy, they can kind of circumvent that disability. If they have a 25% underdevelopment of their cerebellum, they kind of flop around a little bit and with their arms and hands and upper body as well as their legs, and you know they have cerebral palsy. If they have 50% development, they're going to be restricted to a wheelchair. This girl here has 90% underdevelopment of her cerebellum, the size of a grape instead of a tangerine. And you can see her, she has clamps on her head and holding it up. Since she was born, and she's 11 years old here, since she was born, people have to wipe her bottom. Here she is, it's now 2 years later, after this picture was taken. She's now 13, she's 11 in this picture. She's going through puberty. Somebody's gonna have to change her tampons, wipe her bottom, feed her, do everything for her. Give her massages 3 or 4 times a day to prevent pressure ulcers, all this machinery that's needed to move her around, care, extraordinary care. It's $5 million a year for that child. There's 10,000 babies born with this disease in America every year. Whose fault is that? OBGYN. Totally preventable. This is the part of the brain that's underdeveloped when you have the cerebellum, when you have cerebral palsy. Same way with belly button hernias. It's a gradient disease. Here's a pretty typical belly button hernia the size of a walnut. Just, you give that baby a hypnotic either by injection or gas. Puts a local anesthesia around that. 10 minutes, the procedure is done. You've repaired that belly button hernia, but the baby shouldn't have to go through that. Okay? Mama was missing something during pregnancy for that to happen. This next one, the baby was born dead of vascular shock because the defect went from the 2 inches below the belly button through the belly button to 2 inches above it, and there's no skin over it, and the stomach and the spleen and some of the intestines are hanging out, and you can see well, why didn't the OBGYN know that that baby was suffering from vascular shock? Well, he was in the bathroom giving himself drugs. This one here, the defect goes from the pubic bone all the way to the middle of the chest, and here the liver and the stomach, the spleen, and all the intestines are hanging out. You can see how that baby would die from vascular shock being born that way. Where was the OBGYN? That baby's perfect. The brain is perfect, lungs are perfect, heart's perfect, liver's perfect, everything's perfect. It died from vascular shock because all its insides are hanging out during birth. That baby, if it was delivered by cesarean section, would be alive today. Somebody needs to go to jail here. Same with cleft palate. It's a gradient disease, different degrees of severity. Whether you're rich or poor, if the mother's deficient in zinc in the first 3 to 7 weeks of pregnancy, you can get cleft palate and many other defects. Kids are born deaf, congenital deafness. Doctors want you to believe it's genetic, and they're raising money. They have all these funds to raise money to prevent, change the genes, fix the genes. It's caused by deficiency of a single mineral called manganese, not magnesium, manganese. Deficiency in the first 3 to 7 weeks of pregnancy causes congenital deafness. This new book that pharmacist Ben talked about when he introduced me is called Epigenetics. Epigenetics tells you that the genetic theory of disease transmission is one of those dead theories. There is not a single disease that's transmitted genetically. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. There's thousands of dead theories from the medical trade in the halls of science. And the epigenetics tells you that these diseases that are said to be genetic are preventable, and many of them reversible with nutritional supplementation prior to conception. A lot of diseases that, like Huntington's disease, which is a disease that kind of falls in between Parkinson's disease and MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, they're said to be genetic. It occurs in people 50 years of age and older. Come on. Okay, we'll get into that in a little bit. Totally preventable, reversible. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. That's me in 1977 with one of my cystic fibrosis monkeys. You've all heard of obesity. Of course, the medical theory and the government's theory of why America is obese and overweight is because we don't exercise enough, we eat too much. Well, following their theory to eat less and exercise more, we became the #1 obese nation in the world. We're #1! The only thing we can brag about being #1 in the health area is we're obese by following their theory. So obviously that theory didn't work. So what causes obesity? What causes people to be overweight if it's not lack of exercise and eating too much? Well, it's a simple nutritional deficiency. You take the nutrients and it goes away. We'll get into that in some detail if we have time. Multiple sclerosis, a disease that historically occurred primarily in people between the ages of 30 and 60. MS. Today, in the last 10 years, the peak of the demographic curve of who gets MS are kids under the age of 12. They're even diagnosing MS now in 10-month-old babies. 10-month-old babies. How's that happening? Free radical damage to the myelin of the brain. Free radical damage to the myelin of the brain. Well, why is it now we're getting it in young babies, 10 months old, and it used to be in people 50 years old? That's because our babies are getting free radicals damaging their myelin of the brain. Well, where are they getting the free radicals? Apple juice. What happens when you cut an apple in half and leave it exposed to the air without putting lemon juice on it? It turns brown. What's turning brown in the apple? It's oxidation of the oil in the apple. Apple juice is not taken care of very well. It's one of the first non-formula things you give a baby is, an ounce of apple juice and 8 ounces of water in a little bottle. They're giggling, they're happy. But the free radicals that build up because of the apple juice oxidizing, the oil in the apple juice oxidizing, causes MS in little babies. Thrombotic stroke, again, used to be in people over the ages of 50, 60, 70. Now, the peak of the demographic curve are kids under the age of 18. How's that happening? Well, thrombotic stroke doesn't occur because of genetics. Thrombotic stroke doesn't occur just out of dumb luck. It's caused by an omega-3 essential fatty acid deficiency, or a ratio problem between omega-3s, 6s, and 9s. That's another one of my lawsuits against the FDA. Because I prevailed in federal court, I can legally say that you can actually prevent thrombotic stroke. You can prevent pulmonary embolism. You can prevent coronary thrombosis and deep vein thrombosis simply by supplementing with omega-3 essential fatty acids and having a perfect ratio between omega-3, 6s, and 9s. Before I sued them and won in federal court, I couldn't say that without getting put in jail. How many of you give your kids and grandkids under the age of 5 1,000 milligrams of supplemental omega-3s every day? Gosh, I don't see any hands going up. That's why your kids are going to die before you from MS and stroke and stuff like that. Heart attacks, Keyshawn disease, cardiomyopathy, heart disease. So how come this is happening now? Why are they getting all these strokes? We didn't get strokes until we were in our 50s, 60s, 70s. That's because we were getting omega-3s when we were kids. Well, wait a minute, we didn't supplement. Well, yeah, you did. It was in egg yolks. Our kids now are living on Fruity Pebbles and apple juice, Sunny Delight, and shredded wheat, Welch's grape juice, and Cheerios. How many omega-3s are in them? Nothing, 0. You better be supplementing your kids and your grandkids before they're conceived, all through the pregnancy or development, from the moment they're born, with all 90 essential nutrients, and you'll avoid all this stuff.